All right. Hello.
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 Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. This is number two of this series that I'm doing. We'll see what it ends up turning into, but just trying to have conversations with people I love about our journeys, about um the state of the world right now, how to potentially move forward, the work that we're doing, which I find very interesting, the work you're doing and sharing the stuff I'm doing. So yeah, the playroom, that's where we're at.
Let's do it. Well, I guess for context for people, we've been neighbors for it feels like ever, or grew up at least as neighbors,
Yeah.
in the Bay. And I don't know what additional context should we give?
Yeah, we're both Persian, grew up in the kind of Persian tech world here. Like, our parents were in that and grew up around a lot of those people. And I think both were interested in entrepreneurship from a young age. We're doing our own companies and different things. And I've been in a lot of ways on parallel tracks in terms of self-education, in terms of putting out our ideas, those sorts of things. Actually, you have a big head start on putting out ideas from me, but I think both of us for a long time have had a lot of ideas that we're excited on sharing. And so, similar age, similar neighborhood, similar families, similar vibes. So I think just a lot of resonance there over the years.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's fun how like our paths have like intertwined at different times, different things that found interest in. Also, we found independently at different times, and then come back, and it's like, wait, you're also onto this?
Yeah.
Uh, it's cool.
Yeah.
I just like yesterday when we were talking, I was telling you like it was like I was just reflecting on all the different things, like moments in time where I was like, oh, I learned this thing from Ari, and even like the simplest thing, like note taking for the first time, like in the way you did it, I was like, dang, this guy really knows how to take notes. He uses like a really cool tool to do it, and anyways, that
Yeah.
got me. And but yeah, I mean, honestly, that's maybe somewhere to start. Like Notion was one of the first ways that I started to realize that I could like actually synthesize ideas from my head and start to like connect dots, and organize them, and then eventually try to turn them into things.
Yeah. What do
And
you use for your kind of personal knowledge management system? What does that look like for you?
so I have it's It's a great question. So it's basically a bunch of like vaults that are I call like databases, or actually I call them vaults. And in those vaults are different things. So I have places, activities, documents and wikis, notes, meetings and ideas, people. And what I do is I correlate all of those together. So like, for example, my entire contact book is in Notion as well, and they link to each other. And
Mm.
so like my phone as well. And so when I meet with Ari and I have like, if I take notes, which I often do when we talk, um, like the last time we talked on Zoom, and you were explaining all the intelligence types, like I was fervently taking notes and I tag that to Ari. So that and what other topics there are, whether we talk about like psychedelics or spirituality or tech, and so I know that like I can make that information surface to me at the right time when I next need that.
Hmm.
Uh, but the one of the more interesting things I do is I also like I write down who I am as a person in Notion, which is sometimes like strange to people, but like it keeps me sane almost. Like it, I go back to look at my values. I go back to look at like, sometimes it's goals, but I should actually just pull it up and look at it.
Let's do it.
I call it like mindset and identity sculpting. So like, what is my mission, my North Star, my motivators, fears? And these things change. Mantras that I'm repeating in my head right now, mantras that I once was repeating that I want to remember.
Mm.
But
Yeah. Do you have like one of the things I found is I'm pretty good at capturing what happens in my life. Like I'm pretty good at after an experience, reflecting on it, doing voice memos on it, like making a cluster of the biggest insights, whatever. But one of the things that I think I haven't nailed is like actually coming back at regular intervals or like doing anything with that information. It's like I capture all of it. I have this like list of like 10 insights from this concept, this conference or big insights from a psychedelic experience. But then what like, do you have some sort of a cadence that you come back to those, or some sort of system for like making sure you continue to reference those?
Yeah, I I'm human as well, so sometimes I don't come back to them and I also forget. But I tell myself that honestly, that's the part you said, capturing it, like in that, GTD they explain capturing is like the most important thing ever. Because even if you don't know what your use is for it today, like AI is you're about to train your own large language model on all the information of Ari someday, and it's going to turn into like a Jetsons level assistant for you, and it's
Yeah,
gonna blow your world. It's gonna even like I think to myself someday if I have like we don't solve for Alzheimer's before I get Alzheimer's in theory, and and I don't remember who I am in the morning. Like, could I have a tool that is literally able to train me in that? Like, I wake up every morning and it's like, this is the person that you are, and if ever you don't know who that person is, there's like a little device in your ear that's like, oh yeah, that's your son, that's your granddaughter, that's this person, that's whatever,
yeah,
and it's trained personal data and every opinion and whatever I gave it over the years.
right.
Insane.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I need that today. Like if I
Yeah.
spend too much time alone, or like if I spend too much time meditating or something, you kind of like, your persona dissolves, and then I'm sitting there being like, Wait, what am I doing again? Why am I here again?" And it takes like interacting with someone else or coming up against some other person for that persona to like recrystallize and be like, "Oh, this person's calling me Ari. Oh, they're calling me the shaman. Oh, I have a job to do." Oh, it's like, then it's like, "All right, I'm back." But before that, I think you're right. I'll frequently go back and look at old videos and be like, "Oh, this is what I was on 2 years ago. That means that's why I'm here today." And you can kind of reconstruct that. Yeah, I think that's so important. I think that's going to be I think a big part of any sort of actual conscious living practice has to have that reflection process, that capturing process, and that, yeah,
Yeah.
one. Mhm.
Oh, go ahead.
One of the things that, a couple of years ago during COVID, I made this process called the compass, which was trying to understand what I'm good at, what I love, what the world needs from me, and then kind of synthesize those into a North Star and go forward toward that North Star. And I did that, and I went forward towards that North Star. And what I realized though is that there was a lot of information that was missing from that map. And if I just was navigating towards my North Star, it didn't necessarily tell me how to balance that with my relationships, to balance that with love, to balance that with just having fun, to balance that with physical health. There was like all these things in my life that were not just work, were not just my purpose. And I think that's something that can be a little bit dangerous, is like when you find your purpose, you think, oh, that's actually why I'm here 100%. And, my body isn't as important. My previous relationships aren't as important, whatever. Whereas I realized after following that path for like a year, I was like, oh man, like all of that stuff, just because you know where you're headed and just because you know what your meaning in life is, or maybe what you could help try and contribute to the earth, doesn't mean that all of the rest of life just went out the window. And so that's why I started, like about 2 years ago. I had this intention to come up with something called the GPS, which the idea was that it would be like the next level after the compass. Um, and now it's become kind of something a lot bigger at the same time, because it ended up becoming, I realized that to know the GPS, to know how to navigate kind of the game map, you have to kind of know what game is being played here, right?
Hmm.
You have to kind of know like what type of game is life, you know? And the different religions, which give us different ethical frameworks, have a different view of what the creation of the world is and what's going on here. And thus that's kind of how they frame the ethics. They say, Christianity says, God made this perfect world. We were living with him in perfect unity. Then we screwed it up. And then now we're in this like place of sin and like confusion. But this guy came, this amazing guy, Jesus, he redeemed us. And so if we're good, we can go back to paradise forever. So life is a test, and the goal is to pass this test. And every moment you're constantly being tempted into sin or tempted into evil, and you have the choice to do good. And life is basically trying to tip the scales of your actions towards this idea of good. And that's what sets up kind of their whole game, right? It's a strange way to think about it, but I think religion is like almost the earliest form of gamification in a way, right?
They're the game makers. They
Right.
create religion, and then the people that uphold it theoretically. Do
Yeah, they're like
you
the refs. Like a priest is like a ref, right?
It's like a ref, yeah.
The ref.
Uh,
They're like, "Oh, like foul, like you sinned." And then you're like,
and
"Oh,
it gets interesting though, because like the Pope, for example, is critiqued now for changing rules and like modernizing things almost too much. And
Mhm.
people are like, wait, this wasn't the Christianity I signed up for. I
Right.
read something about nuns being valued the same in the as like people who are not like regular baptized Christians. And all of these nuns all of a sudden started to drop out. And they were like, nope, I'm not being a nun anymore. Like I was doing this because I thought I was going to be greater value to God in the kingdom of heaven. And now you're saying that's not the case. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
Um, and that's just one form of that. So it's interesting. Like
Yeah.
when you create this, have you created the GPS?
I've created a system that is I've created the game board, but I haven't created like the how to play the game, if that makes sense. Like I've created like what I think the game is and what I think the pieces are and the players are and like I've created the chessboard, but I haven't figured out like the optimal strategies for chess yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think part of it within that, whatever the optimal strategy is, like it has to somehow be adaptive to change and like
Right.
receptive to it. And
Right.
that's part of the problem of these previous religions is like, well, we've got it all figured out now. Here you go. And it's like, well, you got it figured out for a while, but you taught people not to kill each other and how to be good stewards of the land to an extent. But now like time has passed and there's a lot more complicated, human needs and questions that are not quite um,
Yeah.
accounted for or were not accounted for when that text was created.
Right. And there's this conversation. When I just went to this integral conference, the integral is kind of an attempt at a like synthesis of what could a new spirituality, new worldview, new cosmology be. And when I was there, I also got hip to this kind of sub movement or derivative movement called metamodernism. Have you heard of that? Like it's coming through in art a little bit, like Everything Everywhere All at Once is considered a metamodern movie, but it's this. Do you remember the plot of that movie?
Sorry, of which movie? Everything All at Once?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this idea that, there's this like basic life before the metaverse, or before the multiverse. You could kind of think of that as kind of just like traditional life. In some sense, you could think of it as like an analogy to traditional religion. It's like, you know what you have to do. It's stressful. There's a lot of shit going on, but it's pretty straightforward. And then this like multiverse gets introduced to them, oh, there's all these different universes. And this girl who got stuck in the multiverse, her daughter basically becomes a nihilist because she says nothing matters because there's so many different perspectives. There's so many different ways this could go. There's so much more to life than just this one little existence. Nothing actually matters. And this is kind of a parallel for what happened in postmodernism, which is, like you have the old religions, the traditional religions, the traditional way of life. You see life as, if you're a medieval peasant, you see life as like kind of a pyramid from you to the king, and you're kind of stuck in this place. Might as well make peace with the place that you're at. Then modernism comes, and modernism is like, yo, actually things change. And like we can make money and we can improve our conditions and we can have bathtubs and we can have hot showers and like technology. And everyone's like, oh my God, technology. Let's just do that. Let's do that progress thing. And then, after the Second World War, we're like, holy shit, the progress thing kind of backfired a little bit. It killed a bunch of people with atom bombs. We're alienated from each other. Some people are doing this communist thing as a response to it because they feel alienated from one another, blah, blah, blah. And eventually you get this next movement, which is postmodernism, which is how do we include all these different perspectives, the perspective of people who were left out of that view of progress, right? How do we include the indigenous perspectives, the female perspectives, the non-binary perspectives, all this sort of stuff. The thing is that with all of those perspectives now on the table, it can often lead to nihilism. It can lead to this idea that no one's right or there's no way to live. Everyone has their own way to live, and you kind of should just be okay with all of that. And the response to that, which is just emerging now and maybe has been emerging over the last 10 years, it slowly is, the idea of the googly eye in Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is this idea of recognizing that there's an infinity of perspectives, recognizing that it's impossible to discover final truth because we're always part of the equation of that truth seeking, and thus it's kind of shifty and dependent on us. But in the face of all that confusion, in the face of all that uncertainty, how do we still bring sincerity, bring joy, bring play? And that's kind of what that googly eye represents, It's in the face of this crazy multiverse, in the face of nihilism, I choose to love, I choose to show up. Um, yeah,
Do you know about perennial philosophy as well?
yeah,
Like Huxley. So that to me is like another way of looking at it as well. Like this viewpoint that all of these religions and all of these wisdoms, like to an extent, they all make up the same, story of humanity, and like they are all to be taken for what they are. But um, it finds the common ground, and it's interesting that there's like other religions that have done that as well to some extent. I don't want to like prop any up by any means because they all have other sides to them as well. But like Baha'ism as well, like Baha'i is a religion, like in Abdul Baha'i, I think that was the founder of the religion. He like their whole thing as well is like all these religions are one part of one big book.
right.
Uh,
Right.
I think is nice. It's a nice
Yeah.
idea.
I think it's nice too. I think it's coming, whatever that is. I think so many people are taking stabs at it now and trying to synthesize, okay, what do we do with all this science stuff? What do we do with those perspectives? What do we do with, this realization of all these meditation stuff from the East that we haven't been able to integrate into Western culture? It's like all these things are being put on the table and people are trying to make these maps of how they all fit together. Integral is one of those, and that's what my GPS is built on top of. So it we respect science and objective ways of knowing, but we also respect internal experiences and subjective ways of knowing. So mystical experiences that happen inside, meditative experiences, psychedelic experiences, that sort of stuff is part of the map as well. And so it takes into account both kind of the outside world and the inside world, and it takes into account the individual and the collective. So there's some systems like, communism is really focused on the collective. It's focused on, what the world is just systems of class fighting with each other over time, right? But then there are other views that are talking about the internal experience. How do you knit those together? And Integral aims to knit those together by creating this quadrant map. And then my system is simplifying that on top of that.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah,
There, why, like I just for the sake of
yeah,
the advocate here, why do these systems need to exist? Like, why do we need to have religion or like new sorts of ways of sorting out who we are?
yeah.
Um,
My answer is that uh this is actually just it's a seat that's waiting to be filled within the human mind. So it looks like up until about 50,000 years ago, this didn't need to be filled in the human mind. It seems like humans weren't asking these sorts of questions, just in the artifacts that we find from them. It seems like they were kind of focused on the day-to-day stuff. They were focused on hunting and gathering and fishing and this sort of stuff, making tools. But it doesn't seem like they were really thinking about death or about what the point of existence is and trying to answer that in a convincing way. They weren't doing elaborate burials, which means they're not super worried about the soul or anything like that. They're just thinking, oh, the guy died. That's sad, but maybe it's not the end of the world. It seems like after 50,000 years ago, we start asking these questions. It seems like around that time, we start realizing we're going to die and that this is a finite experience. And we start trying to understand what this all means. And it looks like out of that questioning comes this need for some sort of meaning or purpose in life, a sense of what is truly real and how do we live in alignment with it, what is truly real. And so since that time period, um, it seems like we've always needed an answer to this question. And if you don't answer this question in a communal way, people are going to come up with their own answers to this question, right? And their own answers to what the meaning of life is going to dictate their behavior. The problem is if we don't agree on what the meaning of life is, even in basic terms, then we can't really work together. Because maybe for you, life is a test where every decision you're making is against good and evil. Whereas maybe for me, life is a drama. And sometimes you need to play the role of the villain to instigate change or something like that. And that's going to create very different societies, very different ways of organizing. And so the idea is that today we're in a situation where for the first time we can't we actually can't survive in isolation anymore because we're a part of a globalized system. We realize now we're a part of one earth, one atmosphere, one ocean, that the ecosystems in the Amazon actually affect things in other places by sequestering carbon, by creating oxygen. We know that these things are interconnected and interrelated. And so to solve some of the problems that are arising at the global scale, climate change, um, even the loneliness epidemic, pollution, the wars, the culture wars, all this stuff that's going on, it's going to take a coordinated effort. and we can't do a coordinated effort if we don't think we're playing the same game. And so the idea is we need some sort of a meaning structure so that we as humans can come around and say, okay, that is the game that we're trying to play. Okay, you be striker, you be goalie, you be whoever, and you're going to come from your different perspectives and your different skills, but we're all trying to play the same game here. In the absence of that, I think you have what we have today, which is, we actually can't solve these problems, and these problems are creating more problems, and it's kind of getting out of hand for us.
Is global cooperation anti-capitalistic?
Is global cooperation anti-capitalistic?
I use that term global cooperation only because it's a term actually that this professor I met in Michigan used, which is his like the end of his career, working in AI forever. He was like, dang, like actually the problem is not AI coming after people. It's like large corporations that are basically autonomous vehicles themselves that just try to make money for themselves. And even the spokes within them, the wheels, the people are all replaceable. And he was like, and that's the whole way the world works right now. And there's going to be like, unless we try to intentionally prioritize global cooperation. But it's a question I didn't think of until now to ask, which is it anti-capitalistic to an extent if you are like, you know, I don't know. Yeah, global cooperation of a species.
Yeah. It's something I've thought about a bit, but I'm also aware of the fact that this isn't my active domain. What I will say is that I think I've come to understand that the way that evolution happens is by a process of transcending and including, meaning evolution doesn't overwrite or it doesn't destroy what came before it. It just adds another layer on top of it. So a human being is just a couple layers on top of a mammal, right? It has like the ape layer and then like the early human layer and then like the modern human layer. And then mammal is just a couple layers on top of a reptile. And you can actually see that in the physiology. So we have the cells, you're right, of cells or our cells. And then we have the central nervous system, the spine of a fish, and the brain stem of a fish, and then we have the brain of a reptile on top of that, and then after that we have the brain of a mammal, the limbic system, and then after that we have the cortex of an ape, and then in front of that we have the prefrontal cortex of a human, right? So it's literally this process of it takes the reptilian brain, which used to be the only thing, and then it adds this emotional system on top of it, and it reinterprets the signals that are coming from the reptilian brain through the lens of relationships and emotion. And so I think capitalism, what?
Yeah, capitalism just is. It needs to evolve, right? Like it's just basically it evolves. You build layers on top of it.
Right. And maybe we find ways to price in certain things, price in, the externalities that currently we don't really look at, like, companies, no one owns the ocean. It's not considered part of the equation. So you can just dump stuff into it and like write it off on the balance sheet because it's like, yeah, we don't do the ocean cleanup, right? But your body can't do that. Like your body is a contained system. So it every part of it is related to the other parts and they have to stay in some sort of harmony, even though they are autonomous to some degree. Your liver is doing liver stuff, your heart is doing heart stuff, but they all have to kind of obey the circadian rhythm of the whole body. And there's these larger protocols that keep the whole system alive. And I don't think we've really developed those on a global scale yet, the kind of survival protocols for all the organs.
So let's go down this rabbit hole then. So to solve for this, then we're going down the rabbit hole of creating like a shared spirit, like a new version of spirituality, or building a layer on top of it that creates some form of shared vision for the species on where we're going towards, where we're evolving towards. Is
Yes.
that fair?
Yeah, that is fair. I think that's what's emerging right now.
So how do you do that?
Yeah. Um,
Because there's a part of me that wonders, like, is it actually, it's not how do you do that? That's not my question. Like, it's not, do you go after individuals and hope that a sum of large individuals that have shared vision for the world can create global cooperation of sorts? Or do you try to go after, I don't know, people in positions of power or corporations and try to change those? Like, yeah, I don't know.
yeah. I, the way that I've seen it happen in the past, and let's play with this and see. And also, this is what I do as my job. So I've taken a stab at it myself, and at some point we can go into that if that's interesting. What it seems like has happened in the past is there are some sort of scientific revolution happens, or revolution in what we think of as true and real happens. So let's say in the Enlightenment, we became aware that, oh my gosh, the Earth isn't the center of the solar system. We're orbiting the sun. And actually, there are these mathematical principles that seem to describe things and predict things maybe better than what the Bible says. And someone came up with that in their room during the Black Plague just because of doing some equations, like COVID lockdown. He just figured this shit out in his room. And so turns out actually we can figure shit out about the world. And maybe the world isn't pre-given, and maybe it isn't everything, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Maybe there is actually some natural laws here or truths here that we haven't discovered yet. Let's look at that. So this revolution happened in thought. And then that started to actually, first you get the philosophers and the scientists and the people who are really going to wrestle with that, Newton, Galileo, um, all these
Yeah.
guys who are actually attacking that problem, and they're bringing their kind of insights to the public. But it takes a while for the public to actually, to internalize this. It takes a while for math to be taught in schools, right? It takes a while for the culture to actually adopt this modern worldview and let go of the old traditional worldview. Um, and it really, I think that really started to happen. But it was a small group of people that were pushing that thing, that were starting the factories, that were industrializing the cities. It wasn't like everyone, it wasn't the priest saying, let's industrialize the cities. Like it wasn't the old guard that was doing it. It was some entrepreneurial new class, or maybe they were from the aristocracy. They were probably getting good educations and learning about math and their studies with tutors and stuff. And then they were like, well, how do I make some flying machine, some invention or whatever? And then the culture started to build around it, and the culture started to influence everything. Like think about the world's fairs. Everyone knew about the world's fairs, or a lot of people in the modernized world, industrialized world, knew about the world's fairs. And the world's fairs were basically this celebration of modernity. It was like all these amazing inventors are going to come and they're going to show their amazing inventions. And so what you see happens is originally there's like these philosophers, there's this like kind of scientific breakthrough, and then it starts to become kind of a cultural breakthrough, and then it kind of just becomes obvious. And we saw that also in postmodernism when that arose. It's like, we start having photos of Earth from space, and that starts to have actually psychoactive effects on people of being like, oh my gosh, we really are on one thing together. And that was like a big moment when that happened. And actually there's the GIs going overseas and seeing people of different races with their own eyes, not just in books or something like that, but actually being like, oh my gosh, Europe exists and Asia exists. And like I actually spent a couple of years there, and it's a really alive in my mind. And with mass media and TV, we started to become aware of these other perspectives, especially around the Vietnam War, where people actually saw the war from their home and were like, oh my God, maybe this isn't as great as we thought it was. And so the technology started to change the consciousness. Psychedelics entering the scene started to change consciousness. Gurus coming from the East started to change consciousness. And it took a while, but now, any paper bag you pick up is going to say, please recycle. It wouldn't have said that in 1950. You wouldn't go to a coffee shop and see Black Lives Matter or see, the female logo or something like that. That's something that came into culture. There were the philosophers saying we should consider different perspectives, and modernity has flaws in the way that it constructs grand narratives. And then, the Beatles start making songs about it, and Jimi Hendrix starts doing his thing, and Woodstock happens, and all this cultural stuff happens. And so you never have to read the postmodern philosophers to get what the core of that new worldview is, that we should eat organic, that we should love the earth, that we should love each other. You can get that at a store or in a movie or in a song. And so I think that's going to happen again for, what I call level 5, or, they call metamodernism, or the integral stage, which is the thing that's coming. 5 being there was the tribal societies, that's level 1. There was the traditional societies like kingdoms and empires, that's level 2. There's the modern societies, that's level 3. There's a postmodern worldview, that's level 4. And then level 5 is the metamodern or integral thing that's emerging. Um,
And
and I,
but these are stages in time, right?
yeah, there are stages in time, but there are also cultural movements and percentages.
What makes them levels? Like, do they stack on top of each other?
Yeah, they're levels in the sense that they include the previous perspectives in them.
I see. So a level 6 will emerge.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. You could argue that it seems like in the developmental communities, it seems like there are some people who are scored at what you would call level 6.
Mm.
But it's the time where that will have a significant portion of the population populating it, and thus creating cultural media around it and creating movies and songs and cities around it, or things around it, won't be probably for a long time. But it can be reached. It just takes going through all the other steps. So the people are usually pretty old.
Yeah. But if you extend life expectancy, then it's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
There's like one of the famous developmentalists, Bob Keegan, he makes this claim that maybe the reason we're living longer is to try and enter these higher states. I don't know. I think, yeah, there is a greater chance probably that people get to a higher stage with a longer lifespan.
Yeah. When we talk about higher stages, like my brain goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then do you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, my system's built on.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, great. It, so in that, do you see like another layer being built? Like, are there layers that go beyond self-actualization being like the top layer, right? Like, um, what 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 comes next if
Right.
you extend expectancy and you, I don't know, manage to accomplish a lot of that, the rest of that faster in life?
Yeah. A lot of people have models of that actually. It takes a second to go into them because but there's one called the Stages model by Terry O'Fallon. If you look that up, she talks about that, and you can see, Maslow's final level is her like, I think maybe it's her 4.5 or her 5.0 out of a total 6.5. So she is categorizing stages beyond that. Her system is built on the work of Suzanne Cook-Greuter, which is built on the work of Jane Lovinger. So that's kind of one lineage that's in the space. There's Bob Keegan's work, which you could say Bob Keegan's work probably goes to where Maslow draws the line. He calls it self-authoring, I think, or self-transcending, self-transforming maybe is the final stage after self-authoring. And then, spiral dynamics is another famous one. And that talks about, I think what you could consider Maslow's last stage maybe is what they would consider teal. And it goes all the way up to coral. So there's teal, turquoise, coral. So they have other stages beyond that as well.
I,
So these are a couple different models that are out there.
I didn't know. That's exciting.
Yeah. It's in the kind of niche though, because it takes a lot. It takes a crazy person to sit in the room and read all this stuff. And they also usually say that you don't become interested in this concept until a bit later. Um, so the idea of development of consciousness itself, not just the development of technology or the development of skills. Like that can be accessed at an earlier stage, but the development of your actual meaning making process itself, that doesn't happen until later. And there's not that many people that are there. So it's not a really big field right now, but it's emerging as becoming more popular today.
What would you call the field?
It's usually called, well, there's a bunch of interrelated fields. This field specifically is usually called adult development.
Okay.
So the idea that we don't stop developing just when we're, hit puberty, but that there's actual development that continues past it. That's usually called adult development. But it's related very closely to complexity theory and this idea of evolution in the universe, and the idea that the evolution of the human being's ego and meaning making system is actually the tip of the spear of evolution itself.
Mm.
So that evolution it started as, quarks or the quantum foam crystallizing into, atoms. The atoms create stars, the stars explode, create heavier elements, have planets around them. The planets have the conditions for molecules to emerge and life to emerge, right? And then life goes through stages of complexification. So it goes from cells, which are very simple. Then the cells team up and they create multicellular organisms, which eventually make fish. The fish crawl onto land. They develop more structures, right? The reptiles turn into mammals. The mammals have families. The mammals turn into apes. The ape have communities. The apes turn into humans. The humans have tribes. then the tribes eventually turn into cities, kingdoms, empires, nations, information age, industrialized things, and then information age societies. And the idea is that now we're on the cusp of the next one, the level 5 one, and that is actually the edge of evolution itself. It's not like a human thing necessarily. It's actually just complexity itself is taking this form and shape. And so the development of the human mind, which is the most complex thing we know of, its development is actually related to cosmic development. So adult development is often tied in and knit together with this idea of cosmic evolution. And that's what integral theory is. Integral theory is a mesh of adult development and cosmic evolution and, spirituality and archetypes and all that shit.
So you were at this integral conference, but like integral theory is made by who and operated by who? And like, yeah, give me the tea.
Yeah. So this idea of a grand synthesis of all these cultures has been an idea that's been around for, let's say, maybe the last 100 years. There was a guy in India named Sri Aurobindo who took a stab at it, and he made something called the integral yoga. There was this guy Rudolf Steiner in Europe who took a stab at it. Different people have taken stabs at it. The thing that we are talking about when I say integral is this guy Ken Wilber started thinking about this sort of stuff in the 70s, and he made a map of basically how to combine what we've learned from Eastern meditative practice and Western psychology, and he combined those. And then over the years, he kept adding on to the model. And people say, and I would agree, he kind of cracked or did his magnum opus in 1995, 1996 with this book called Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, which is a thumper of a book, which is why it's not that popular. I mean, it's like just so crazy. And that's, one of his 20 somewhat books. And this is his like, I got it, guys. Like, hold on. I cracked the universe. And this created a movement around him called integral or integral theory. And it's this conference what is a part of that movement, but the movement itself kind of peaked, it seems like, in the mid 2000s, maybe around 2008. And then it started to wind down because it seems like from what I was seeing at the conference, it seems like people didn't find a convincing way to actually put it into practice at a cultural scale or in terms of an ethical system or a religious system. It wasn't able to kind of tip over from philosophy into something that could really scale bigger. But people are now taking stabs at that. So there's people like Layman Pascal, there's people like Brendan Graham Dempsey, who are trying to say, okay, how do we make this actually a cultural movement? There's this guy, Hansi Freinacht, who wrote a book called The Listening Society, which is a politicalized version of integral theory, you could say. So it's like, what would a political system based on integral look like? And there's different people taking these stabs at it. There's people taking stabs at what would a, integral spirituality look like? That's what this guy, Brendan Graham Dempsey, is doing. So there's a bunch of people now emerging in the space, and they're on YouTube. They have like, a couple hundred or a couple thousand followers. They're not that big yet, but I do think it is a movement that is coming now.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
about this pocket.
What?
I don't know much about this world. It's pretty cool though. I'm
Yeah.
like writing down these names. I'm gonna have to go and read a bunch.
Yeah. I think maybe the the
Where to
the what?
where to begin? That's the question.
I think where to begin is with a book called Spiral Dynamics by
Sure.
Don Beck. He just focuses on what's called levels or stages in the integral theory. So this has like it's trying to be literally a theory of everything. So it has, the levels, it has, states of consciousness, so meditation and spirituality. It has different multiple intelligences. It has archetypes. It has the whole thing. It has literally it's trying to categorize every possible thing that we should think about. But I think that's a lot to download if you're not actively interested in creating a map yourself. I was actively interested in creating a map, so I was like, oh my God, this is the Holy Grail. But I think for normal people who this isn't their job, I think the most interesting thing is getting in touch with just the levels in a concrete way and that's Spiral Dynamics does a great job of that. And then I think the multiple intelligences and the archetypes are also very interesting to people, and that's where I've spent a lot of time is working on those specifically, because Integral doesn't talk too much about the archetypes.
And the intelligence types, are those yours or are those integral?
The concept of intelligence types is recognized as fundamental or fundamentally important by Integral, but I've made my own intelligence system.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so you ever going to present, do you like present this at like an integral conference someday? Is
Yeah,
that a thing?
I would love to. I would love to present it. Right now, I'm working on writing up the wiki, so I can just have so if someone's interested, they could just go, read about it online. And then I'm probably going to start putting out videos on this channel, and just talking through it. Okay, here's the first intelligence, second intelligence, and telling the story. Maybe even writing a book or something like that, just so people can get it all in one. We'll see. Um, but yeah, that's the idea. And yeah, there's a couple of integral conferences coming up, so hopefully maybe we'll speak at one of those.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
What rabbit hole to go down next?
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. That was fun. I like, it's
Oh, it's a good one. I I wish I knew more so I could ask better questions,
yeah.
but I will come.
What's next for you? What's next on the horizon for Milan? And can you give us a sneak peek of what's
Yeah.
coming?
Yeah, so this book I'm currently working on is probably like taking up the most of my time. It's called Moonshot Moments, and it's about like what enables people and society to be able to have these what I call moonshot moments, which is points in time where there's great technological advancement or borderline sort of human evolution. And so I talk about three main topics, being AI, transhumanism, and psychedelics as being the three tools in today's world that will help us usher in this next human renaissance.
Hmm.
Um, and and so within that, there's lots of different layers within the transhumanism categories, like this whole school of philosophy about like how we use tech to evolve and how humans have been using tech to evolve for a long time. It's part of what we do, whether it's tools or now technology. Or someone loses an arm, they get a prosthetic arm, like that's part of transhumanism as well. Someone taking Brian Johnson taking 90 supplements when he wakes up in the morning to try to reverse his age. That's transhumanism, that's biohacking.
Right.
And then from an AI standpoint, kind of the stuff I was talking about early on in this, which is that for the first time, all of the personal data that if you are truly capturing and creating all of this personal data that you otherwise didn't know what to do with it before, it's now going to be more valuable than ever. The same way that your data is valuable to companies, if you can create your own data, you can figure out ways to leverage that in really useful ways and a multitude of ways really like effortlessly now because of AI. So I talk about that and I talk about personal knowledge management, the importance of it, how to do it, my way of doing it. I'm also going to make some YouTube videos about how to literally use Notion to do personal knowledge management the way I
Yeah,
do it.
that would be great
Um,
to see it.
my talent.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that. And then the psychedelics part, which is that there's this great movement happening now, which is like psychedelic assisted therapy. They're trying to bring psychedelics like to the masses. And there's a lot of really incredible people who are working on the work to try to scale that. There's constant challenges with all the different types of psychedelics and the different types of ways they're trying to bring it to market. But and all the years of research that were halted and had to go underground because of the war on drugs and Richard Nixon. But nonetheless, the progress is great right now, and so I talk about that because it's in the same vein of kind of the stuff that you're talking about, which is that we need to like consciously change ourselves. Like Michael Pollan's book is literally called like How to Change Your Mind.
Right.
Like people need to become more neurologically plastic, in my opinion, and we need to be less rigid. And that's part of like our world right now just cultivates more rigidity, more like distance from each other, more isolation. And I think psychedelics or specifically psychedelic assisted therapy is going to be one of the best ways to prevent that and scale that.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. I
It's
tie all of that into one book. That's what I'm working on now.
You're basically talking about how is level five gonna emerge? How is this metamodern integral stage? What are the technological revolutions that are driving this next renaissance? Um,
And part of it is this greater vision that I share in the last chapter, which is mostly my opinion, but I mean, it's shared by, I think, a lot of tech people and so on in our community, is that like the end goal is to become like we're the smartest thing that's ever existed. Like I subscribe to the Fermi paradox, which is that until we know of an alien, like we are it. Like we're the smartest thing ever. We can't die on this planet. And so to become an interplanetary species is the goal, and to do that as fast as possible. And the fighting over finite resources on this planet is futile when there is a galaxy of resources to be mined. And so that's kind of my perspective, is that like, yeah, global cooperation will allow us to be able to get to that vision a lot faster. And yeah, and then all the other things that will help us get there along the way. But based on the things I've been reading, that's kind of my take.
yeah, yeah.
As
I'm not.
I'm like, oh man, I got to start on the next book, or like we got to write a new book together.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
It's forthcoming.
this
Um,
level.
I don't know what I think about the multiplanetary thing.
Yeah. Tell me.
I think it makes sense from a resource perspective. But I guess maybe the angle I think about it, like when people talk about Mars or people talk about those other things, and I totally understand, like, they want to mitigate existential risk and we want to have access to more resources. I understand that for sure. The one question I have is, or the one thing is that, if I think it has to be underpinned by a revolution in consciousness and a revolution in culture. Because if we just ship, extractive and, narrow-minded modern focus over to Mars, we're just going to do the same thing with fewer resources out there. It's like if people can't live in the Sahara or don't often live in the Sahara in big numbers, like think about a place with no atmosphere that's more barren, has no life. It's like a much harder technical challenge. Um, and yeah, I think the key is, like, if we can't figure it out on Earth, you know, we we can't.
Well, yeah, I come back to that and say, no, 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 we need more time.
Uh,
Because only because yeah, from again, from an evolutionary standpoint, I think that we're the greatest accident to have ever happened.
mm,
Like if we haven't found something of this level of intelligence on other planets, or they haven't found us, or we haven't identified that they found us, who's to say this isn't all one big accident, and that it would take another, you know, I don't know, like 500 million years before there is even a fish that is spawned. And what if that fish never spawns into anything more intelligent than a dinosaur ever again? So yeah,
yeah,
that's so that all leads me to believe that like we definitely have to get our shit together and preserve this planet, because this is heaven. Like this is it, there's breathable air when you walk outside. That's incredible. The other planets, they can't say that much. And so whether it's these planets, whether it's figuring out how we travel faster so we could go to other solar systems, I don't know. I'm not the physicist,
yeah,
but I do know that we should be an interplanetary species because, um, yeah, because why not? There's literally all of these different solar systems. Like when I talk to these different professors of like AI research, they're like, I got into this thinking that I was going to live like the life of the Jetsons, like vacation on Mars. I would fly around the rings of Saturn by the time I was 80 and then just come back
right,
to Earth and like, chill with my wife. And
right,
he's like, unfortunately, I'm greatly miscalculated how fast progress happens.
right.
And yeah, he used all that to say like we're living the AI time we're living in now is like being alive when like Newton was like working on physics, like it's just like it's
Yeah,
incredible the time we're in right now.
it is one of those times. Um, I have two responses. One is on the concept of an accident, on like that for an accident, and the other was was let me start with that because I'm not exactly remember the other one. The idea put forward here and put forward in the complexity sciences generally is that it's actually to some degree inevitable.
Mm,
It's actually like the opposite of an accident. And the idea is that it seems like the universe, there are two forces kind of competing to some degree in the universe, which is there's the entropic force, which is trying to pull things down, right, into smaller bits. It's trying to, make everything less complex, to bring chaos essentially. And then there's the complexifying force, which is actually going in the opposite direction, which is trying to knit things together. And it seems like even at the scale of atoms, atoms are attracted to one another. And if there's enough atoms around, they will come together and try and form things. And it takes certain conditions to create more complexity, but it seems like they are actually creating these more complex conditions naturally. Like atoms came together and they made stars, and then there are stars that have been so big that they fuse new materials, and those new materials make these planets, and then planets provide more habitable zones for new chemical reactions to happen.
They don't. Only this planet did that. We don't know about life anywhere else.
We don't know about life anywhere else, but it seems like when the conditions are right, which seems to have at least happened once, it seems like there's a force that's taking us somewhere.
I believe it's possible. I think that's theoretically possible, but because we haven't proven it, I think we have to act as if this all the circumstances were only right this one time.
Um, I
Because we found it anywhere else. And our tech is pretty good now. Look, before we had telescopes, before we knew there were other solar systems, I was with you. Like, yeah, this might exist on other planets. There might be other places where this
right.
exists. But now we can see that far. And we're like, dang, as far as we can tell, this is it. We're alone.
Yeah. One of the things, the Fermi paradox doesn't necessarily say that we're alone. It just says, why aren't we seeing? The Fermi paradox says, based on this equation, which is a specific equation, I forget the exact name of it, but based on this equation, there should be a ton of life in the in the galaxy and in the universe. If and you can change the weights of those values in the equation to make it more or less likely, but any way you cut it, it should be pretty likely. Given that, why haven't we encountered anything else? And then there's all these different possibilities that it could be. I think one of the possibilities is like, you know, if a 5-year-old applies to Stanford, I don't even think they'll respond,
I
right?
see what you're
It's like they may be looking at us and be saying, okay, if these humans can't figure it out on their own, why we can't come down and help them, because then we're always going to have to baby them for the rest of time. But if they go through the natural cycle of evolution that needs to happen, and if they become a planetary civilization and synchronize in consciousness together, then they'll be ready to communicate with us, because we don't have time for Donald Trump. We don't have time for, Putin and these guys. If these guys are still getting millions and millions of followers and they're getting platformed on this planet, like they can't play, how are they going to help us in our galactic concerns? What do they have to offer to the table? um you know I think that could be a reason as well.
I like that. I like that theory.
Yeah. And I will say,
Um,
some people say that psychedelics or mushrooms, Terence McKenna says that mushrooms may have been extraterrestrial, right? That came here and, they were part of the life that came here. And, when we take them, we learn things and we have these enlightened experiences, right? And I think psychedelics are going to be a part of what leads to, greater global cohesion, greater cultural cohesion, is people having these heart-opening experiences of unity and compassion and love for each other. And given that, yeah, maybe I guess this is kind of a separate take, and we can get off this tangent in a second. Maybe this is like some cooked shaman shit. But
yep.
one of the things I've thought about is what if the aliens aren't in a physical form? What if they're in a higher plane of reality, and the beings that we encounter, I can do a little shaman tangent here. It seems to me that some of the beings that I've encountered in shamanic states, um, are not necessarily earthly, or they don't have to necessarily be from Earth, or they're not necessarily a higher human form. They're just a higher form of consciousness that doesn't have a physical, tangible form. And that could be where consciousness goes, as opposed to spreading out over a galaxy physically and just like owning more planets, and like conquering more of the physical universe. Maybe it's actually going deeper into the higher states of consciousness, and maybe transcending the body entirely. I think that's one of the routes evolution could potentially take as well.
It's pretty cool.
But I don't know. I think we have stuff on our
Who,
plate.
let me ask you this question. Whose version of evolution wins?
Whose version of evolution wins?
Yeah. Like, and only because tech for the first time is so influential in how we evolve. And like if I go and I put a chip in the brain and
Right.
I'm going down a very different evolutionary path. When I put a phone in a hand, same thing. It
Right.
evolutionary is very impactful. It eliminates any of the empty space where you might have otherwise been sitting there reflecting and meditating unless you're very intentional about it.
Right.
So is it possible that we don't evolve past the physical bodies and that the evolution goes in a completely other direction because we, I don't know, we will it that way or we force it that way or we
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we now are juggling like okay, if a maybe this is kind of a crazy analogy, but if a baby is playing with like, Lego bricks, there's only so much harm they can do. There's only so much damage they can do to the room, to the space, whatever, right? If they're playing with a hammer, maybe there's more harm they could do, right? And if they're playing with like a AK-47, there's a lot of harm they could do. And we're at the point where we have the exponential capacity of basically an AK-47, in the hands of children at the global scale. So I think the chance, and people like, there's tons of people, Nick Bostrom, Daniel Schmachtenberger, et cetera, that talk about existential risk. And, we're pulling these balls out of the urn, if you've heard that analogy, faster and faster. Like the idea that there's this urn and, some balls are white, some balls are gray, some balls are black. Black is like you can't come back from it. It's like a, bubonic plague or something. Gray is like, maybe nukes. And then white is like, I don't know, Kleenex, I don't know, something like that. And the idea is that if you're pulling these balls faster and faster out, the incidence that you pull out a black ball is going up. So I think there's definitely a chance that, unfortunately, someone with a lot of power, Putin launches nukes. That is a chance. There's a chance of that. There's a chance that someone finds out how to create some sort of Ebola evil virus that kills everybody. And we know that like 1 to 4% of the population are psychopaths and sociopaths. We know that, we've had serial killers and yeah, I think something like that. I could be wrong.
That's
I'm
high, man. That's a high number.
yeah,
25% of all of us are sociopaths?
1 to 4%.
Oh,
One
oh,
to
oh. Sorry, I think you said 1 out of 4 people.
no, 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 1 to 4%.
Wait, dang, I
And
have siblings in that.
no, but it only takes one person who wants to see the world burn with exponential technology, right? Like if I just have my fists, there's only so much I can do. If I have a knife, if I have a gun, we saw what happens when a deranged person has like a semi-auto gun. Imagine if they can do a plague. So I think there are possibilities where we could get aborted off this path in an existential risk way. I think there are also ways in which certain parts of the population will start to deviate and put chips in their brain or go the full, cyborg route. But I don't think it will be everybody. I think there are attractors for evolution. I mean, this is something I'm still trying to understand, and I think something we collectively are still trying to understand. How does evolution work, and is this complexifying force a real thing? I think it is, and I think that force is going more towards it is not staying as physical. It needs to be supported by the physical world, but you can see as children develop, they go from very concrete understandings of things to having more conceptual understandings of things to potentially even, at the higher stages of development, being able to feel subtle phenomena, non-physical phenomena is what seems to happen at some of the highest stages of development, like people being able to sense what's coming before it does, or feeling into synchronicities or feeling interpersonal fields. So I think that's where evolution is going, but they are going to be competing. And there will be subcultures that want to become cyborgs for sure. I mean, you have subcultures today that want to be heavily body modified and that sort of thing. So you'll see these different ones, but we'll see what the dominant one, emerging one becomes.
Part of what I believe and why I believe we become interplanetary is because I do think you end up with a planet of people who are like cyborgs and a planet of people who are, different. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the questions that I grapple with in the book is this idea that if all goes really well, maybe we double life expectancy in my lifetime. And if you double life expectancy in my lifetime, say you can grow new organs for me. Everything can be replaced except the brain, theoretically. And we find a way to prevent damage of the brain, theoretically. Now I don't need to breathe oxygen, theoretically. Then it's like, why wouldn't I go live on another planet or something? I have another 100 years or something to my advantage. But whatever, that's one take. That's like one person who might want to do that. The other person says, I want to live 100 years with my family here on Earth and just lay in the grass.
Right.
And so I think that there's I like that your take is like there's inevitability to these different subcultures. I don't remember the name of the movie, but you might know it if I describe it right now. In the movie, there's these three people who can basically predict the future, and they like put them in like this body of water and this little head on a little like thing on their head, and they can basically predict crime before it happens.
Mi-
And what was it?
Minority Report.
Minority Report. So
Right.
they could predict crime. And part of that, the sci-fi twist of that film is that like it's these people are able to predict the future. They have a level of consciousness where that's possible, and then they get exploited, of course.
Right.
So yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that per se, but I'm curious for your thoughts. Like,
Yeah. I
because those are
think
the two realities I see.
the future that we see depends on our stage of consciousness, right? And it depends on our experience of life, right? So I think one of the reasons I think a cohesive answer to what's going on in the universe is so important is because depending on what we think of as being true and real, we respond really differently. So, for example, the modernist view, right, the view of modernity and rationality and this sort of thing sees the world as like, as dead,
Mm.
right? It sees nature as just kind of this resource to be extracted, this dead thing that we can use. Oh, it can make firewood. Oh, we can extract metals and do shit with that. But it's not like a live thing that we need to have a relationship with, right? And this view started all the way back when we started doing the Civilization Project, and we left, living in harmony with nature and with its cycles. And we started saying, no, guys, screw what nature wants. It's what we want. It's what the king wants. Let's build these crops. Let's, use these animals and whip these animals. Like, if you think about it, when you're living in a tribal society, in an indigenous way, the relationship you have with the animals is very, very different than the relationship that agriculturalists have, right? Because if I'm in an agricultural society and I'm using a plow, a plow, like we don't really think about a plow that much these days, but like our ancestors were like super hype on these plows. And this plow is like this big rake basically that's attached to like an oxen, and it like, tills the ground instead of humans. And to make the ox do this, which it does not want to do because it's pulling this heavy thing, you have to whip the shit out of this ox, right? And if all day your job as a human is to be like smacking the hell out of this animal, and hurting it so that it does this job for you, which is not something that it naturally wants to do, you're pretty aware subconsciously of like we're doing a thing that maybe nature isn't doing on its own or naturally. And so you develop this philosophy. The only philosophy that can do that for long periods of time is one that sees nature as subservient or as kind of secondary to the mind, and it looks at the body through that lens too. It sees the body as kind of this wild, natural, crazy thing, and the mind is the father that comes down and whips it into shape. And you start to see, in indigenous cultures, you see people wearing the masks of various animals, of their names being actually the names of various animals, black elk or something like this. Whereas in civilized societies, when people start settling and doing mass agriculture, you start to see our ancestors actually have a ton of these. They love these, ton of just reliefs of like super jacked dudes with huge beards, just like choking out lions, and like stabbing the shit out of predators, basically.
Yeah.
And being like, man is the most powerful force on the earth. And like, look at this sick sword that I have that like I came up with. And like, look at this cool machine that we had. And so it's this shift. I usually talk about it as a shift from the mother cultures to the father cultures. The mother cultures are interested in living in harmony with nature's cycles, being okay with the flow of things, with the chaos of things, adapting constantly to the chaos that is the natural world. You know, when you're in a forest, you don't know exactly what everything is, especially when it's dark. Like you don't know if that's a bug or if that's a leaf or that's a thing. You have to have this kind of magical view of things so that they can shapeshift, so that you can consistently adapt to them. Whereas when you start ordering the world and building civilization, you need a very different mindset, which is much more of like a father mindset, which is like the world is this like nasty, untamed, chaotic, wild thing. You know, people are rioting in the streets. We need to like contain them. We need to like put everything in its place. We need to start creating time signatures that are maybe different from, you know, the seasons, and do things our way, you know? And this kind of reached a fever pitch, you know, maybe at the end of the Second World War, and then it kind of cracked with postmodernism. And now we have the old, you know, kind of father cultures, and we have this new emerging mother culture, which I think is really, but they're divorced,
Mm.
right? So you have the mother culture that says it's okay to eat whatever you want, it's okay to look however you want, it's okay to love however you want. You can do basically whatever you want. And the father culture says, no, the thing that we need to do is efficiency and productivity and technology and this sort of stuff. And these two worldviews, you know, are fighting. These two parts of our being are fighting. And you see like the analysts, you know, they go out for a night of party, they go out, you know, on the weekend and they hang out with mama and they black out, and then they come back during the week and they're back with papa. But there's no integration of these of the party and the work. There's no integration of the fun and the play and the seriousness. And I think that's what we have a opportunity to do today, is create an integrated culture that has both the wisdom, the feminine wisdom, the wisdom of the mother and the goddess, and also the masculine wisdom and the wisdom of the father, and tries to integrate these. And I think some of the visions that we see today, like from Elon Musk and this sort of stuff, is still very father side focused, right? And
Yes. Is it okay if I jump in?
yeah,
There,
please.
there's a, there's a part of me that I love that you brought up Elon Musk. In my head, I was thinking of Zuck,
Yeah,
and
yeah, Zuck.
only though be, I was thinking of Zuck and Musk pre 2024. And I say that to say, in this year, Musk, I mean, yeah, Musk maybe not so much the empathy per se, though he says he does ketamine. But Zuck seems to have changed his persona a bit.
Hmm.
Uh, and to be and the change in persona, I only bring that up because I think to an extent, some of these leaders in the workforce actually define the culture. And the challenge becomes maybe not like, maybe Elon's a unique one because I don't really know if he's religious or not, but like Zuck is religious and he subscribes to a religion. Does that inherently make it so that everyone else suffers then if like the figure does not carry traits of the mother, let's say, and they are instilling that culturally in an organization that's, you know, one of the most prominent ever, um it scales the problem, right?
Totally. Totally. I think this is one of the big issues, right? Is if the world is created in your image, every distortion, every problem in that image is getting magnified to a really huge scale. And I think that is what's happening. I mean, we're living, culture is basically the aggregate of the people who have been platformed minds, right? And their minds are conditioned by their experiences, you know, and I think a big limitation in the leaders that we have today is, you know, if you were to look at it through the lens of my system, they're often heavily dominant in one or two of the many intelligences. And that usually tends to be the cognitive or rational intelligence, and it tends to be the practical intelligence, like how to get shit done. But there's a bunch of other intelligences. There's the spiritual intelligence, there's the emotional intelligence, there's the aesthetic intelligence, and there's the kinesthetic intelligence. And the kinesthetic intelligence is slept on these days because we're not hunting and gathering, and you know, we don't really need to be kinesthetic. But in my research, shamanic research and otherwise, I've found that people with a high kinesthetic intelligence naturally, or people who have developed their kinesthetic intelligence to a good amount, have a very different view of the world than other people, because it's a much more grounded experience of reality, because you're much more aware of the body, and the body is only here and now, right? The emotions are connected to people that might be in different places at different times. The heart might hurt for something that happened in the past, or might be scared of something that could happen in the future. the spiritual intelligence is the maximally like most ungrounded one. It's thinking about like what's the meaning of everything. It looks at something as not at what it is, but what it means. It's like so removed from it. Whereas the kinesthetic intelligence is the most grounded intelligence. It keeps us here and now. And when people have a stronger kinesthetic intelligence, they make different decisions because they're taking into account their body, their energy levels, maybe the energy levels of other people, these sorts of things. The aesthetic intelligence drastically changes how people behave and make decisions. Same with emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, etc. Expressive intelligence, that's a big one as well. So um, the leaders we have and their kind of allergies to parts of themselves, allergies to certain archetypes, allergies to certain intelligences, inability to take certain perspectives, right? Inabilities to access certain states of consciousness and have maybe had a divine experience that changes what they think is going on. All of that is baked into the products they build, is baked into the decisions they make, is baked into even the types of solutions they can think of as being valid. And so a more holistic view of the human and a culture that recognizes this holistic view and nurtures it, I think is the key to moving forward.
Are they the gatekeepers of culture, the people that are running large corporations and organizations in your mind? Like, do they, yeah, I don't know. How do they evolve?
Yeah. Well, we're having a really fractured information, what you could think of as an information ecology. We're having a really fractured time with that right now because of the algorithms, because of social media feeds being so tailored to the individual. I never have to see what a scientist says if I don't want to. I can just hear, and I've seen this happen to my feed sometimes, like when I go super down the spiritual paths, you can get into stuff. It's like, holy moly, like we're getting a little bit disconnected from every other perspective here, and no one's checked this guy in a long time, and maybe it would be helpful to have this be in conversation with some other perspectives. And the same thing for people who are hardcore scientists or hardcore Christians or hardcore whatever. um, and so I think right now the biggest cultural influencers are literally influencers, right? Are people who can talk to a specific audience and have the respect and trust of that specific audience and are getting platformed by them consistently. I think those people are making the biggest impact because a lot of people don't trust politicians. A lot of people don't trust, science for a variety of reasons. A lot of people don't trust religion for a variety of reasons. So people have their few people that they love and they follow them, and they're using those people as kind of a filter on the fire hose of all the information that's coming out. But I don't think it's a really effective strategy towards any sort of collaboration. And I think we can see that in our society today.
Yeah. Wow. It's so complex.
Yeah.
So many ways to approach solving the challenges.
Yeah. Wait. Hmm. I'm trying to, how do you stay how do you stay grounded? I think one of the things that I appreciate a lot about you is that you keep your feet on the ground really well. Sometimes I can be really head in the clouds, but when I've come over to your house, whenever I see you, like your life is working kind of like clockwork, like the fridge is stocked, the beds are made, like everything is kind of locked in. And I think especially in today's day and age where and even in conversations like this where we're flying all over the place thinking about the cultural revolutions that need to happen and the spiritual understandings that need to be attained at mass scale, blah, blah, blah. I think what's needed more than ever are some of these just basic, like I was talking about the kinesthetic intelligence and, things like that. Like, how do you stay grounded, present? How do you set up your life so you can navigate this complexity?
Great question. It's a multitude of things. And the top one, like I said, is that personal knowledge management. Like getting everything out of my brain was the first way that I found like freedom from my thoughts, was in recognizing I don't need to organize them in my head. I don't even have to remember half of my thoughts in my head, let alone the tasks, let alone knowledge, which is tough for some people who are like, you got to memorize everything. I don't subscribe to that. I write everything down. I organize it properly, but I don't memorize things that much. unless it's really important. Um, or I've just read it enough times or learned it enough times. So that's one part of it. The other is I don't know, I think it's now, let's see, I was in college when I was like 18. I think I saw my first like therapist maybe when I was like 19 or 20. And it was the first time I like someone asked me questions and I had to like verbalize it. And it happened because in college I was like, I want to get extra time on exams and I bet I'm slower and I've never been tested. So let me go do that. And it was my first taste of therapy. And then after that I was like, dang, that was, and then I got the extra time. They said I have ADHD among a host of other,
Yeah.
issues. And so then they're like, so I got the time and that solved my problem then. But then I left there being like, wow, that was actually really useful. Like just the process of someone asking the right questions in a way, in a space where I could verbalize them all and process those thoughts. And so that became really helpful. And to feel like I had like a coach almost for like my personal life and my thoughts, because I feel like I've always had too many thoughts, like overthinking everything. Um, and so that was really, it was helpful for a while until I felt like I had this therapist that was really stoic. Like he was aggressively in the like, what you, I think you call like the father figure type. Like he was like, this is how to be productive and effective and so on.
Right.
And by that point in my life, I felt like I needed less of that. Like this was by the time I had graduated college, I had moved to LA and I had already been building startups. I didn't drink or party at all in college. I lived in the sober house and was like quiet and I just like forever believed like discipline was everything. Like if I just worked really hard and like, did all of these things that I would win these awards and I would be so like socially impactful and change lives and do it at scale and I could do it effortlessly and whatever. And I enjoyed building. Like that was a part of it too. It was like I liked building things and it kept me entertained and it was something fun to do. But then eventually once I got to LA and I found psychedelic therapy. It was the first time that I was like, oh my God, I had been seeing the world in black and white this whole time, and there was this whole spectrum of color that I had been missing. I was
Mhm.
like, it was like the first time, and again, it was in the right set and setting, but over the course of like, you know, maybe not even that many journeys, but like two, three, four, it was like, what am I doing? Only eating one meal in the morning and then working for 12 hours on Monday to Thursday, not going to the gym, not going outside, not like whatever anymore. It's like, and like all of these habits that I had um, told myself like, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. Like that can drop, that can go. That in part were like, I don't know. I was still going to the gym maybe, but I wasn't eating right. I wasn't going outside. I wasn't making time for my personal life. I wasn't dating. Like all of these things started to add up, and eventually it was like, oh man, like this is not right. And I was burnt out a little bit, the stuff I didn't like. So I guess this is long and the short to say, therapy and psychedelic assisted therapy was one of the greatest resources that keeps me grounded because it reminds me how to be human. And it's very easy after like 3 months of not doing like a trip psychedelic assisted therapy that like I will forget and like just think, no, I'm happy doing the normal thing. I'm happy going about my life. And yeah,
Easy.
like I have this revenue goal that I'm trying to make for my company, and I'm trying to make sure that I update my website to be the right colors, and I want my YouTube channel to look like this, and I want, I have this book that I'm trying to put out and like to teach people this. And then all of a sudden, once again, it's like, did you know it was 85 degrees today outside and sunny and I didn't go outside? Like, what the hell? And so the learning how to be present, is a new skill to me that I've had to balance with the discipline of the like goals and dreams that I've had.
Right.
And number one thing that keeps me disciplined is I think reminding myself of like the hopes and dreams that my younger self had for myself
Mm.
and being like, that's still a thing. Like chase that, and all of these other things along the way kind of help enable that. And there's
Mhm.
different versions of that, but like, and it evolves. Like wanting to get married, have kids. I want to live on a farm. Like my dream of like a Henry David Thoreau type life, like in the woods,
Mm.
just writing books. So like that's stuff like that keeps me grounded. The notion, like I said, maintaining my identity, writing it down, changing it over time. I
Mhm.
maintain a detailed calendar. Like that's part of the discipline part, I guess. But in that, I've learned I have to schedule, go outside, eat a meal, like make time to be human, and like
Mhm.
that's that's challenging, but that's the modern way almost. I feel like to be productive, to answer your question, like how to be productive, to try to make it all happen while not being miserable and thinking that the world is like ending, and it's there's a balance.
Yeah. I think that's so well said. If I think we have an experience of the world or our life being a problem to be solved, then it can get really stressful, because it's like, oh, but I haven't done this thing and this meeting is coming and that's what the world is, right? It's this like set of objectives. But I think
We grew up in this area where like I had convinced myself that I was like, dude, if I don't build like, at least like $2 billion companies by the time I'm like 25, like what a waste. What a waste of time and resource.
literally, literally, me too.
And that wasn't right, and that doesn't actually enable the building of incredible things. And so again, it's like it's hard lessons. Like I'm also that person that has to like fail to learn, or like make the mistake and like burn myself out sometimes to learn. And I'm often trying to learn that that's not the way I have to learn. Like I can learn from other people's mistakes and believe them. And
Hmm.
but sometimes that's tough.
Oh, it's tough, dude. It's tough for me too, because I think both you and I were on kind of our own individual journeys, and we
Yeah.
don't have a boss, we're kind of making the decisions. And so it requires this really like strongly held, like in some sense, this like, whether it's the king archetype or the warrior archetype, whatever it is, it's a strong kind of like intense, driving father side archetype that's alive in us, which is like we know what's good for us, like because there's been so many scenarios in which someone else thought they knew what was good for us and it just wasn't true, and we had to go a different way. And that strengthens the part of us that says, well, I have the right answer for myself, I'm doing what I need to be doing. But it's really hard to let that go and then let in, oh, actually this perspective may be telling me something that I would learn on my own earlier, and I need to kind of relax on that. And like when to relax that archetype and when to step into it, I think is something that I have trouble with sometimes too, because I tend to be pretty extreme, which gives me a lot of power. It's like I can flip into an archetype super fast, but then it's like sometimes I usually don't realize I need to ease up on the gas on that archetype until I've like crashed using it. Whether it's crashing with mama, that can happen, getting too into just the moment and the feeling and just forgetting the world, and or crashing with papa, which is thinking of everything as, a puzzle piece that needs to fit into place and freaking out on that. Um, but I think what you were talking about is this dance between mama and papa, and having this initiation into the colors, right, as being really important for that, to
Yeah.
get a little bit of help to see it the first time and to have some help revisiting it, right?
Yes. That okay, so wait, there's two things I want to say. One is on the point of the archetypes. I like that you use the word archetypes. In my life and in my Notion system, I call them role models, and it's so important to do this today because it's one of the things that keeps me grounded.
Yeah, tell
Is
me.
sometimes I live in this vacuum of like, there's no one like me. There's no one that I can look up to or talk to that is like me or that does what I do and whatever. And the answer to that is it's true. There is no one like me and there's no one like you. And that what you're going to create in this life, and you can't predict it, and you can do your best, but like at the end of the day, it's like this, there's like this Oprah quote about like you will never know your legacy. Like your legacy is, and for other people to say when you're not here.
So true.
Um, that was this person. And so all that to say, I write down my role models whenever I encounter them. And I make this giant list. There's about 45 of them. And they're all role models in a specific field that I'm interested in. So I
Mhm.
have a role model that I'll look at and I'll be like, he's a great interviewer. I hate the content. It's not actually for me, but the way he delivers words and talks and asks questions and the format, I like his aesthetic. I like this, whatever. Like that's someone I like. And there's other people who I'm like, so I'll give examples. Like
Mhm.
Alan Watts, the way he talks about philosophy, the modern content that has been created with Alan Watts's voiceovers on music. I think that's excellent content that's put out in the world. On the
Mhm.
flip side, I look at like um, Stephen Bartlett, who has this show on YouTube. It's really famous called Diary of the CEO, and the way he does interviews and what
Mhm.
he can say and the quality of the content and so on. Again, it's not necessarily the content that I love to consume because I actually like the philosophy, but the way he delivers content in a modern way, I follow that. And then it'll skip to someone like Um, like who else? Like the so like this guy Richard Dioli. I don't know if you know Richard Dioli from Sacred Heart, who was
I do.
the
I
head
didn't
of
know you were gonna.
schools at Sacred Heart, the school that we went to high school.
Yeah.
He is one of the greatest public speakers I've ever encountered in my life. And, or maybe he was just one of the most prominent. And at the time, I hated half the time he would say things because it always ended with like Christianity, and I'm not Christian. But the delivery of the words, I never realized he was a role model for the way I deliver my words until I was sat there and was writing my sister's speech and I had to practice it. And I was like, how do I want to show up powerfully to this? Who do I think of? And it was like him, like that way that he delivered those words. And so that becomes a role model.
Yeah.
None of these people that I named are good role models of being a good dad, are good role models of being a good husband, are good role models of what, I mean, per se, maybe I don't want to say that about Richard Dioli. He
Right.
might be all the, but
Right.
ever like people I don't know personally, like Alan Watts or so on. And so I have role models for each of those. A good dad, a good like, you know, husband, like a good
Right.
philosopher, a good YouTuber, a good. And so slowly over time, this list of 45 names, it boils down to kind of like, you know, who I am. And that grounds me when I'm like, I don't know how I want to show up in this content, or I don't know how I want to show up in this. It's like, how would he show up? And that, or, you know, how would this person show up? And
Right.
um, there's women on the list too, and, you know, so on. So I try to have some kind of balance of that male
Yeah.
and at
Yeah.
the end.
I think
That's
that's so important, this idea of like a scaffold, that you can kind of grow on, and then you can do your own thing. But I think like one of the big ideas in Integral is that everyone is right, but not everyone has the full picture, right? So everyone what everyone is saying is true, but it's usually partial to the whole truth. And so the way to walk around life then is not to, just be like, oh, I'm the only person, or let me find the person who has all the truths, but to realize that everyone has a piece of the puzzle. And what can I get from this person? And I don't got to take the rest, but what can I get from this person at this moment? And that's kind of what I've tried to create with the archetype wheel, is like you could sort those people into those different archetypes, and say, okay, today I'm trying to get in touch with the king, or today I'm trying to get in touch with the lover. Who's a lover that I resonate with? Like from media or from whatever. Oh, okay, I'll use these three people as my like scaffolds for the lover. Or who's someone that I know is an amazing magician, meaning like an amazing someone who's able to transform themselves constantly and transform other people. Maybe a Tony Robbins or Steve Jobs or whatever it is, and use them as a scaffold. But the goal is to have a comprehensive thing. I think we can get into trouble when we try and be just one person and scaffold ourselves around the personality of one person, as opposed to realizing, like you said, you're a unique person. So,
yeah.
right?
And that was part of my problem back then though, was like, sorry to go back to my personal
No,
problem.
no,
But
please.
like,
This is the
and I
place.
was like, look, Elon Musk runs four companies and he runs four massive companies. Why couldn't I run four startups at the same time? And then eventually it was like, wait a minute, Elon Musk might be miserable. He might hate his life, and we don't even know that. And then come to find out later on, it's like, he's changing the way he works, and now he does psychedelics, and he's working on himself, and it's like this parallel path. It feels like human evolution, but
Yeah.
uh, this brings me back to the point that the last thing you had said, which was the reminder of the colors, which is why I like
Yeah.
talking about psychedelics, is
Tell me
that
about
like,
it.
um, and why I like Alice in Wonderland was like one of the most important films, I think, to talk about, because in the context of us being adults now,
Mhm.
because it feels like people were trying to tell us for a long time that you need to do things that challenge your mind, and that you're going to constantly try to, like, your mind will become rigid and you need to somehow develop plasticity. Now, Alice ends up eating mushroom, drinking drinks, consuming these things that distort her world and vision, and probably create plasticity in the brain, which I don't know if they could have said back then when this was created by Lewis Carroll, but nonetheless, like, they could experience that and say that made this person better and greater. And and so it's very interesting to me that like our modern medicine solution to mental health illness is like, you take the same thing every single day, you take this pill, and we hope that it just like solves that by like creating more
That's
serotonin
actually a
in the brain.
great point.
And when the problem is the consistency to begin with, and that they're like, human life is supposed to be more varied experiences, and it's supposed to be this like, things get bigger and smaller and are messy and whatever.
Fire.
And like the second
Fire.
you're in a cubicle and it's the same thing over and over and over again, they go insane.
And
Or
then
they
the
think,
solution is more of that,
yeah,
right?
this.
And that goes to show how deep the rot is in some sense. It's like and this is why we need to be able to take these different perspectives, because it's like Einstein said, the famous quote that the level of consciousness that created the problem cannot solve it.
That's great. I like that. Yeah.
And it's like, if the like industrialized, modern, like alienated, like cubicle world is making you depressed, their solution to depression is probably not the one that's going to work, right?
Mm.
It's either going to come from an earlier place or a later place, but it's not going to come from that place, right?
And it's part of, I think, the reason why psychedelics hasn't actually been, I mean, there's lots of reasons why it's still, there's a lot of work to be done to like figure out how to scale it to people, but in a responsible way. But the part of the challenge, I think, is that it counteracts the way that we like view life right now, which is like we want to just say, take this thing a little bit at a time and your life will improve a little bit and so on. But a lot of the time, people need to make major changes to their lives, and they are numbing themselves to forget about the things that they need to change and to think that it's not a big deal to them. And it's not until you gain that awareness of that, like, wait a minute, that is a big deal to me, and that does matter to me, and I kind of pushed it away for a long time. And like it's so hard to quantify, but yeah, like the second you can see that you gain that awareness that like how you're in your own way and like all of this, it's life changes dramatically. So
Totally.
I
I
don't
mean,
remember what the point I was making. I got a little lost there.
no, yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think, yeah, we usually there are things that we're afraid of, or there's things that are in our subconscious, that are kind of hiding and that we don't want to acknowledge, right? And in our conscious mind is like, yeah, just block it out. But with a psychedelic experience, you're kind of turning on the lights and you can see these kind of things in there, the elephants in the room that you've been ignoring. And that could be a really scary experience. But I think it's actually, at least in my experience, the fear and the negative experience that is caused by coming to face with those things, where you realize, oh, this does actually really matter to me. This is a problem. And the fear or the sadness or the pain or whatever it is that you experience, the flip side of it is it gives you the motivation to work through it so that you don't have to experience that pain and that sadness again. I think one of the issues with the way that we do things now is we're very focused on numbing and escapism. And when you numb things, they lose their power over you, which is the point of numbing, but also you never fix them because you're always just knocking them away. You're saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I can just numb it. But when you actually look at it in kind of excruciating detail, the flip side of it is it gives you the motivation and the energy to say, that's something that's important to me. That's something that affected me deeply at an emotional level, and you remember that in an emotional way, and it gives you the motivation to solve it. And I think that's an important part of the process.
Yes, that was, I think, where I was trying to get to, was this idea that the other ways of living, it like you said, it numbs and it keeps things status quo. Whereas this kind of it shakes your world up and is like, you probably like there's all these things that are within you that you were thinking and you kind of just brushed aside,
Right.
but now we're going to hold them up in bright, bold letters in front of you and be like, do you want to make these changes to your life, or are you going to now be so hyper aware of them that you can't forget them? And now you're really going to have to either try to numb them again, or this time you could take action and create the life that you want and try to create the world that you want. So yeah, psychedelics are great.
Yeah. And I think what comes with that, at least usually what comes with the experiences I've had, is sometimes, at least in my experience, deep, deep amounts of grief
Yeah.
when you realize, oh, this thing that I thought wasn't a big deal, like that's actually
Uh,
deal, and fuck, that was actually super bad. And I never thought about how bad that actually was, or I didn't get this thing that I needed, and it actually is really affecting me. And I thought that it wasn't a big deal, and I make jokes about it, but it's actually a really big deal. Maybe is the biggest deal. And sitting with some of those experiences, it takes a minute for you to metabolize that realization and to do so in a safe way and in a way in which you're held. And that's why I think, like, you always talk about psychedelic assisted therapy, and having someone there to help you work through that and process that, I think is really important. And as we do this on a collective scale, right, as we start to surface things in the collective consciousness, oh, maybe we've left a lot of people out of the equation. Maybe we're screwing over the environment. Maybe we're screwing over whole groups of people and not listening to them in the same way we listen to ourselves. These are similar to those kind of psychedelic reckonings, but I think we've struggled with being able to play the role of the therapist, have a therapeutic experience collectively or a shamanic experience collectively where we can actually sit with that grief. And what often happens is people just lash back out at it and say, no, it's not that big of a deal. Why are you always talking about slavery? Why are you always talking about women's rights? It's not important. Let's not think about it. And I think what that goes to show is there is a need for boundaries when we do healing work. There is a need to say, okay, wow, I sometimes think about it as the trade-off between the magician and the fool, right? And the magician is the one who wants to transform, wants to change, wants to be alchemized, wants to turn these dark things into something better, wants to transform them. And the fool is the one who, doesn't need things to make sense, doesn't need things to change. We'll just sit here and play and everything can be happy and lighthearted. And it doesn't have to mean anything at all. It can be completely nonsensical. There's a lot of passages in Alice in Wonderland that are just gibberish, or they're making up words that don't make any sense, right? Or doing things that don't make any sense. And that's the whole point, right? Is that sometimes things don't need to make sense and it doesn't need to be a big deal. But the magician is the contrast to that and says, well, like these are the limits in our perception, and that's actually something we need to reckon with, and da 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 da. And so when we do this sort of heavy work, I think it needs to be held in the right way and contained in the right way so it doesn't bleed over into our daily life. Because I've had some trouble with that when you go on the journey and then it kind of consumes you and you can't even brush your teeth or do anything normal because you're thinking about, your childhood. And it's like, yeah, that's important, but we need a little bit of the fool here. We're going to get to it, we're going to deal with it. And it is important to just be present here now.
Yeah, it's one of the most challenging parts is to like because I think for a lot of the stages of when I started doing the psychedelic assisted therapy, it took a while until it got to the point where I could laugh at the duality of the darkness.
That's right.
And
That's exactly right.
like
Tell me
along
about
the
tell me
journey,
about that. I love that.
yeah,
Tell me about that.
along the journey of gaining awareness, it's not always pleasant, right? You're like, oh, now I've this other thing that I forgot about that was kind of dark and haunted me, and I brushed away, and this and that, this relationship, how this person perceives me, and then you're like, well, I don't. Why do I think about why this person perceives me, and so on, and all of these thoughts that constantly kind of you've got to work through throughout time are not the most pleasant. But eventually, I found that you can the stuff that's sad that you'll weep over because you realize you never grieved or you never reconciled or whatever in your head, eventually you look back at and you laugh with this great awareness that those experiences, often the bad ones, make you so uniquely you, and that they have a value. And that at the end of the day, that if you didn't have that problem or that issue in your life, it would be something else, because it's inevitable that there'd be something else. And then that leads you to kind of laugh at the duality of life. And when you leave the psychedelic experience and through the process of like integrating with the rest of your life, like when you're not on psychedelics, you also start to laugh because you remember that duality. And when things go wrong, you're like, what is the universe is trying to teach me, that I thought I had it too figured out, and clearly I don't.
Yeah, so true.
But
It gives us this real humor, I think, to be able to, or just this lightheartedness, the good-heartedness to think, to realize that even the most negative things have been for our benefit and have taught us powerful things. I've totally had that experience too. And when, I have this, I keep this patch near my desk, which is, the joker or the trickster, which it's kind of a hybrid because you see the devil tail. So it's kind of like a hybrid between the magician and the fool. It's dark and it's light. It's kind of creepy and it's funny at the same time. And I tend to think that is kind of the axis, the archetypical axis by which the universe teaches us. There are some moments that are just beautiful. They're just like the lover, or they're just, you can just relax fully. There's some moments that are like the king, where everything makes sense and everything fits in its right place. And then there are these liminal spaces of humor and of dark, of lightness and darkness that, when they come together, I think that actually is when it creates the most beautiful experiences. And when we can allow the darkness in and see it for what it is and see it for its role and welcome it into our lives, I think that's when the, the yin yang can actually spin properly. And it's not like we're fighting it at every turn. And every time it's trying to turn into fall, we're trying to yank it back into summer. It's like, no, you have to let the cycle happen. And it's inevitable, like you said.
Yes. I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. These cultures have also been all like a lot of these cultures have been trying to show us and tell us these things in their own ways. Yin Yang is a great one.
Yeah. Yeah. Eternal.
Yeah. This has been a lot of fun.
A lot of fun, bro. A lot of fun.
Thank you for having me in the playroom.
Yeah.
Playground?
This is actually the playroom. You can see all the stuff
Yes.
here. This was the playroom when I was a kid.
Okay.
So it still has that name on the light switch and everything. Even now it's an office. But I wanted to bring that name and that spirit here.
I love it.
Yeah, bro.
I hope to have many more of these. I will come back with lots more questions for you. You're the only shaman I
Yeah, I'm the only shaman I knew for a long time. So now I've met some others. But yeah, I think that's what's cool about being a shaman is you have the permission to figure it out yourself. As opposed to like if you're a priest or something, it's like, oh, someone knows more than me. I gotta go ask them. Whereas like a shaman, it's like the idea is that the universe is your teacher and your body is your teacher and your experience is your teacher and you can go on that. But that's a story for another time.
But you're also very well read.
That is true.
And
That is
you read a lot. You know, like all these different books and authors and philosophers, I've written their names. So I will do my best to come back a little more educated. But man, that giant book that you were
yeah.
showing and whatever.
So crazy.
Yeah.
I haven't read the whole thing. I've read some of his other stuff more because it's a little more accessible.
Like go book it or something. We'll see.
Yeah. I think the first one to read is Spiral Dynamics. I think you'll get a big kick out of that. I think, and I would love to have another conversation once you've read it and before that and around that. But when you've read it, I think you'll have really interesting thoughts on it, especially linking with this book you're writing, and I think it'll combine nicely.
Yeah, it's tough. Writing the process of a book is one of the most frustrating things because as you're writing and reading and learning, you
Learn so
keep
much more.
reading, and then you're like, this has to go out the door at some point.
I know.
And then you're just like, well, the next one, and that's what makes you like addicted to doing this. Putting
I've
out
been
content.
having that same feeling too. It's like I got the system, and then the second you feel like you've got it, you find another thinker, another book. You're like, fuck. You have another experience. It like blows the whole thing up. You're like, all right, do I ship this or do I edit this? So I'm in that kind of place right now myself.
Books are very unique beasts.
Yeah,
But anyways, grateful for this. Thank you again. And
bro.
yeah, I don't know. Any closing remarks?
Um, yeah, I love this, man. I really appreciated your vulnerability, talking about your experience, and asking me questions about a topic that you haven't spent as much time in, and letting me kind of go crazy with it. I really appreciate you you know, ask me about that and letting me riff on that. And yeah, this very much felt like the playroom to me. And
Good.
yeah, I'm really glad you're here with me at the beginning.
Good. Successful episode 2.
Yes, sir. Okay. Love you, man.
Bye. Love you. Peace.
Bye, everybody.